call to order the ad hoc committee for vacant and abandoned structures, the neighborhood revitalization program, and the business license enforcement for rental properties here today, this morning. We're delighted to see so many interested citizens with us today, and we're delighted also to have Councilman Lee with us. I think Councilman Green has a conflict and have not been able to get in touch with him. This is very serious business, and I think we all want to see some kind of consensus where we move forward with a meaningful program that attempts, at least, to attack the issue of blight in the city. We have had many discussions with regard to that. I'm glad to see the mayor here. We have talked about issues of dilapidated structures in so many of our neighborhoods, so many vacant buildings that exist in the city. The other problems of neighborhoods that are continuing to grow that we're not seeming to be able to get a grip on how to address those issues. So that's why we're here today, and we don't plan to be here for a very long time today, because I think that we can encapsulate most of the discussion that we are planning to have today in a period of time that is meaningful and effective, and we can all get on with the rest of our business for the day. I do have the minutes from the last meeting, Mr. Lee, and we'll take a moment to look over those minutes very briefly. There are a number of pages, so I don't think you'll want to read all of it. I don't think that either of us would have any objection to the minutes, and I will
move to approve.
When you move to approve, there's a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which was in October, I believe, and 17, and we do accept the motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting. When we originally started to talk about this issue, we talked about a three-pronged kind of program, or a three-legged stool, if you will, is the way I put it in some of our meetings in the communities. We wanted to look at how we could dispense with the large number of state delinquent tax sale properties that exist in the city of Montgomery, and look for ways to convey those properties to responsible parties so that they can do something meaningful with those properties and get them back into productive use and back on the tax rolls. We talked about the need for some kind of rental registration and inspection program in the city, as we today are not registering. We don't know the number of rental properties that exist in the city. We don't know the condition of the rental properties that exist in the city. So we wanted to promote the idea of a rental registration and inspection program. And the other issue was to look at these vacant and abandoned properties that we see littering the city in almost every sector, and in particular the more impoverished areas of our city, where we have a number of residential dwellings or former dwellings that are sitting vacant. Here on the west side of town, almost every third one you will find that is either boarded up or not boarded up, or wide open, and just a fertile ground for vagrancy and illegal activity. So, as a native Montgomeryan, and having been here all my life, and having lived through the areas and the eras when the city was not nearly as resourceful and didn't have the resources that it has today, but we did see the growth of blight that we see in the city, that we're seeing at an accelerated rate today. So I believe that this is important work, and if we can attack those areas of abandoned, vacant buildings, properties that are not being taken care of because they happen to be delinquent with a state tax sale, or the city may own some of them as well. And if we could look at our rental properties to make sure that rental properties are decent properties, and that they are up to code, and places that are habitable for people who are renting them, I think we could make a real difference in the city. Demolitions was also one of the major issues that we talked about, and we did step up the effort with the demolitions in the last fiscal year, and it's continuing this year. And we do have some of our city officials here who have been responsible for some of the areas that we discussed here today, and I would like to indulge them and to give them an opportunity to give us a sort of an update as to where we are with demolitions, where we are with neighborhood revitalization effort that we talked about trying to create a neighborhood services department, whereas in the mayor's words, that somebody wakes up every day with this on their minds, that this is their responsibility to look at the issues that affect neighborhoods in the city, and also the number of demolitions that have taken place within the last several months. We'd also like to get a brief report on those. So, is it possible that we could call on our city employees?
Where's Chris?
The supervisor, I think Chris Conway is here to talk to us
Why
about.
don't you set the stage, and then Thomas, I'm sure, has some numbers. But talk in terms of the holistic approach that Councilman was talking about, and how we structured or restructured with you at the top as it relates to the neighborhood and what we're trying to attack.
Yeah, so
And I apologize, I've got a press conference and so does the chief back there at 11 o'clock, so we'll be stepping out here in a minute.
yeah, so one of the things that in relation to what he's talking about in terms of the neighborhood services department, or kind of what we're calling the city services department, I have been serving as the public works director since the mayor came on board. And as the public works director, that took in sanitation, street maintenance, inspections, your 2 engineering divisions, and so it also now includes 311 and includes our bonds / neighborhood services area as well. So I think there was some confusion in terms of, when I introduced myself to people, what is public works? I don't necessarily understand what public works does. What is that? But I think people do generally understand the concept of city services. And so I understand it better. And I really wanted to more clarify that there are certain services that the city can provide, and there are certain services that the city does not provide. And we're really in charge of those ones that we can provide. So in terms of the city services that we provide, we're the experts on that. Again, like Tracy said, we wake up every day with a singular focus on that. Now, specifically towards the effort that we're talking about here, we've kind of even renamed our inspections department to include that blight component, okay? So under the leadership of Jerry Russell in the inspection / blight department, blight removal. So he also, we instituted I'll kind of call him the blight czar, but Thomas Carr, who was the chief of housing codes, he has been elevated to a position to basically and very specifically look at all of these issues that Tracy's talking about. So when we talked about a 3-legged approach, or 3 legs on a stool, or whatever it was, you got to start somewhere, and you got to kind of get a baseline of where we are, and in my mind, to figure out a strategy for how we're going to tackle some of these things. Again, some of the easy things that we had already been doing, because there is a process set up already through the housing codes and through our property maintenance division. We tackle the 4 major issues all day, every day. Clean up, board up, fix up, tear up, or tear down, whichever way you want to look at it. So those are the 4 things that we've always been focused on and continue to be focused on. But we've added a component to that to kind of look and try to, I guess you'd say, come up with some real hard numbers in terms of what does our tax sale property inventory look like out there. We already know what our city-owned inventory is out there. We had an effort where we took in some of those tax sale properties, and we removed a lot of those structures that were on there. And so we have some vacant city-owned property going. When you see us tearing down a piece of property out there, That's not a city-owned piece of property generally. That is a privately owned piece of property that we have ordered the owner to tear down in most cases, and they have not done that. We are doing that and placing a lien on that piece of property. So, you know, it doesn't, because we tore it down, it doesn't now revert back over to us. And so, you know, we've got a catalog of properties that we're hammering down and trying to get those down. And I'll let Thomas speak to the numbers, but that's what we've been doing over the last several years is trying to take those down, similar to our Fully Raised Streets program, and trying to get the worst things taken care of. So,
But 2 years ago, when the city council put an extra, was it 200,000, I think it was, in the budget for this, and then the next year we came back and added another 400,000. So we've been able to get a substantial number of structures down. Have you got the numbers?
yeah, I'll just turn it over to Thomas and let him kind of talk about some of the efforts that he is engaged in at this point.
The 200,000 that we had last year, we got approximately 160 structures down. I think the true number is 157. With the new money that we've got brought on board, there's of course we were being real aggressive. We had some engagement with ADM. Okay, so ADM engaged us and informed us that we needed to come in line with the new process. That they got a new director. He interpreted his rules and regulations a little different. He wanted us to change the strategy. So we've had to go into
Which costs more and more time.
it's an asbestos abatement program. So we've had to invest into some expensive testing and some abatement processes to remove asbestos through our demolition process. Our cost has increased, and we had a little delay getting started this year with that. To date, we're up to about 75 approved demolitions. We're continuing to bring them on board. As we bring them on board, I think we've got 30 of them that are out for testing right now. We just released another 20. So we've got about 35 that are dropping on the ground as we speak, and the rest of them are coming forth. So the other 40 is in the process of asbestos testing or being let out to contractors at the time.
And what is our goal to have? We had 157 last year. We'll have that many this year?
That number will probably decrease a little bit this year because of the cost increase. What we really do is we watch that number of what we're expendituring, and we don't want to exceed what the budget has been. So, last year, what we did was push some of the asbestos properties to the side and went ahead and tore some stuff down. And then when we got down to the end of the year, we went ahead and expenditured for some abatement of asbestos. So we want to put the money where it's best spent. To speak of the rest of the stuff, since I came on board, it took us a while to backfill my position, but we've been meeting about every 2 weeks with the neighborhood response team, which includes the chief and Regina and several other parties with the city. I've also reached out and touched sanitation, the chief, and created a map, if you will, that allows us to identify all the players within the city, so that when we have a property, we can reach out and touch whoever's in charge of the bonds, neighborhood organizations, the police department, our code enforcement department, sanitation supervisors, trash. So we're creating a network of city employees that come together to solve these problems. The state properties, when you talk about the vacant and abandoned properties and state properties, the data sources that we've started pulling together, some of them are third-party data sources from the waterworks board, power companies, and stuff like that. I've talked to 4 different vendors that wish to sell us some software, very expensive software. Through working with Lou and his new IT manager, we decided that we want to try and structure something in-house. So we've got some good data that's available to us, and we're just now getting it structured into a database to where we query that database and get answers back, okay? That data is also being built into a GIS layer to where I can target a certain area and then bring out the data per territorial amount. So, those state properties you're talking about is about a little less than 1,200 of them. I will say that the vacant and abandoned properties, if you layer those on a map, you'll discover that those vacant properties, a great number of them are the state properties.
Many of them are state property?
Yes, sir. Rental registration stuff, we've talked with Pam Corbin and her group, and Mr. Russell's been involved in that as far as trying to structure something of where we would go if we were doing the inspections.
You talked about asbestos thing. Hasn't that always been the case, though, that asbestos abatement is necessary?
It has been.
Prior to the Department of Environmental Management.
It has been, but there's a new director that came on board, and he came up with a different criteria for, in other words, he interpreted the rules and regulations different than the past director did. So we had to come into compliance with whatever his desire was.
Could you give us an
Tracy,
idea?
can I clarify that a little bit?
Yes.
The regulations really did not change, as you said, but what we kind of were exempted on was residential structures, okay? If we're 3 residential structures in a row, they looked at that as a commercial structure, so that kicked it up into a different level. But as long as we were doing single residential structures, they more or less exempted us. We still went and did a review to see if there was anything kind of open and obvious or whatever. And because that would have been such a minimal amount, it was excluded from any type of further testing and or abatement. And so the previous director was very comfortable with that scenario, and that's what we proceeded on. We still notified ADM that we were tearing the structure down, gave them 10 days notice, get all the utility shut-offs. I mean, we went through the process just as we understood it to be. When they had that changeover, he came in, he said, no, you still need to show me that you've tested, that it is clear, and there is no asbestos, residential, commercial, it doesn't matter. And so when we started, I mean, we knew there was maybe asbestos floor tile, that was not a problem. We would do a vetted demo method, and the previous director said it was fine, and this director just said no, that would be subject to a restriction field. So we started testing. We did find, we knew it was asbestos floor tile or asbestos siding, whatever it would be. And instead of the wetted demo method, they would actually bag it and send an asbestos-approved contractor out there before anybody else could do that here. So that's kind of what changed. There was just a different interpretation in terms of what we had to do to affect those demolitions.
And how has that affected the bottom line in terms of the cost of abating or demolishing structure, and also the ability to get more structures demolished?
On average, the increase for a structure that has been found to have asbestos, the average increase has been between $1,200 and $1,500.
$1,200 to $1,500.
If that structure has been found to have asbestos siding or valve materials on it.
And so our average last year prior to this was what per house?
Last year we was at $1,500 per house. Some of them were greater, some of them, but the average still met in there about $1,500 per structure. And this year, for the ones that have asbestos, we're doubling that. Now, not all of them are coming up with asbestos. It depends on which neighborhood you're in, the era of construction that was built.
What about the overall, the overview of the development of the neighborhood revitalization program, or the neighborhood services department that we envision at some point? At what point are we in the development of that, and when do you envision that we will have a cohesive entity that we can identify, that the public can identify as the neighborhood services component of city government, that they can reach out to when they have issues in the neighborhood.
Well, let me answer that question by asking you this one. What do you see as the neighborhood services that the citizen needs to be provided?
Well, I think that if you ask any neighborhood resident who lives in a neighborhood that has challenges, they could present to you a list of things that they think need to be looked at aggressively by the city that they don't believe the city is doing at this time. And there is not, the clarity I don't believe that we need so that the average citizen understands that if there's any issue in my neighborhood, I can dial 511 or whatever the number is, and there is a staff of people, just as many cities have, neighborhood services department, whose only job is to work on issues that affect neighborhoods.
Right. I guess that's what I'm trying to convey. So if you think about what the Public Works organization did, that is now the City Services Department, I'm not aware of a city service that the neighborhood would need that does not fall under that at this point. Now, in terms of what they would contact, I think it's a very simple thing. You call 311, there is a group of people who get that directed to, 311 operator doesn't do any of the work. They don't go out and inspect, they don't go out and fix a pothole, they don't go out and fix a traffic sign or a traffic light or anything like that. There are 6 departments fully that are focused in all of those areas, because as you can imagine, it is a monumental task to try to handle all those calls and complaints or whatever it is. So I think hopefully, if anybody doesn't understand that today, I would love to make sure they do understand that. The one call to City Hall, if you have an issue and you think you need a service that the city can provide, 311 is your call. To augment 311, that is a call you can make. That is, from 7 to 5, you can call 311, you can talk to someone. But the city's website has a knowledge base. If you click on 311, request a service, you can do that 24/7. You can email 311 at 311@montgomeryal.gov. That is received 20. They check those every morning and go through those, so you can email those at any time, and those will be taken care of. So we're trying to, I guess that we'd also need the feedback of what is anything falling through the cracks, because what the 311 service is meant to do is provide the citizen a way to not only get the service request out there, but also receive feedback in terms of where does that sit? Was that taken care of? Did that get to the right person? And so if they give us their contact information back, we can let them know, whether it be phone call, whether it be email, whether it be text message, whatever it is, we can let them know, yes, we received your request, it was routed to this personnel, this is the date that you can expect that, or this is a routine service, this happens, every 3 months or whatever it is, and it's in the pipeline, those types of things. So we're trying to add to our concept with open data. If you go to the open data smart city icon on the city's website, we're trying to put as much information out there in terms of street paving, in terms of sanitation schedules, in terms of, we're working on right now kind of our ditch cutting scenario, in terms of that's just a routine maintenance thing that people call about all the time. And, if you knew the numbers of ditches that we're cutting and how we're having to deploy our resources to do that, it's not a demand and response type of situation. I'll just use an example. Atlanta Highway from Mountain Meadows all the way to Chantilly. They basically have a crew that starts there at Federal Drive, Atlanta Highway, works its way back to Chantilly, and they start back over. And it just, whatever time that takes. Last year it was raining every day, it seemed like. So not only were we not able to cut out there, but when we did cut, we're a week away, and we're halfway down Atlanta Highway, and you go back to Federal Drive, it looks like we've never been there. So those are some of the challenges. I just wonder what other entity would fall under that umbrella, if that makes any sense.
Well, it does make sense. I just wonder to what extent are we effective in doing what we're doing today? Because I think that what you're representing to us, and I do understand that we are fulfilling the needs of neighborhoods as things now exist. I would take issue with that, because I do talk to neighborhood people all the time who feel that we're not fulfilling the needs. I talked to a resident just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, in the Garden District area, and there are some alleys behind some of the houses over there. And there's someone who's been dumping in that alley behind these people's houses. And the residents have attempted to get city support or some response for that, but there has been no real action taken to remove the stuff that's been dumped in the alley. We have that same problem in the Highland Park neighborhood where there's a network of alleys there that the city has abandoned and sort of left to the residents there to take care of the alleys. The residents are confused as to whether or not it's their responsibility to take care of the alley, or if it's a city-owned alley, should the city be doing something to take care of it? So those kinds of things exist all over the city. We have an issue in the Capitol Heights neighborhood where someone's operating an automobile shop, a mechanic shop in the neighborhood, and the city seems powerless to do anything about it. So those kinds of things that I think that continue to plague so many of our neighborhoods that are simply not being addressed by the current apparatus that we have.
Right. Well, I guess I would say to that, what we really need and what the only way we can address it is if we have those specific examples that we can go to. I mean, we just talk about holistically that there are problems in a neighborhood and there are needs not being addressed. I don't know how to answer that because I don't know, again, the city doesn't offer all the services. I think we do, all those that you just mentioned, but we just didn't, I would say that's news to me.
Is it an issue of resources? We have someone in the audience here today who came before the council the other day asking about street sweeping. And the answer she was given is that we just don't do that. Well, that's not good enough for me, because there was a time when we did sweep streets. So the question is...
Well, the real answer to that is we do not fund a street sweeping program then. How about that?
But why do we not?
I don't know why we don't.
That's the point I want to make. The point I want to make is, I don't think it's adequate to say simply we just don't fund that kind of program. The question is that a service that people expect from a city? And I think they do, because at one time we did sweep streets. And I do realize that we're in a different environment now, and that we don't have the resources that we once had because we don't have additional revenues. And times have changed. A gallon of gas is not what it was 10 years ago. So the question is, with a department like, and I do believe that you're a competent individual who does, as good a job as you can do with what's available to you. My question is should the city council or the mayor or the city government apparatus, the policy-making structure, do more to provide resources to provide some of the services that people expect the city to provide, such as street sweeping, keeping the storm drains clean, all of those basic minor things that we used to do that we're not really doing very much a good job of that.
Yeah, and I'll speak to, again, I can speak to specific things. So street sweeping as a general rule, we still do operate street sweepers.
But only in certain areas of town. The downtown area is swept every night, right?
Correct.
But there are neighborhoods that never get swept.
We don't, as a general rule, we do not sweep in neighborhoods.
We used to.
I can't answer that. I know you haven't for 14 years.
There was time.
I'm not saying that you didn't. I'm just letting you know that it hasn't been done in 14 years since I've been here. So the question becomes, and I don't doubt, I'm not saying that we shouldn't sweep streets on a frequent basis. I guess what I'm saying is, if we want to add that as a service, does that mean we detract from some other service? Or how do we add to that? Because we can't under what we're given today. If that makes sense. So to answer your question, yeah, you would need additional resources to do it. Now, I do know this, there are council people that use discretionary money to hire outside street sweepers to do street sweeping in their neighborhoods. Those funds have been given to neighborhood associations to effectively make the call when they needed a street swept or whatever the case might be. Because I think there's something similar to that in the garbage.
Do you have any comments
No, I think a lot of, the underlying thing there's what all extra do we want, and then at the end of the day, how we can pay. That's ultimately what it boils down to. All those issues we were just talking about. Somewhat not curious, but back on some of these, I could just switching gears a little bit, and I know what's in my mind. What's your definition, or do we have a definition between vacant and abandoned when it comes to properties?
I don't think I think that we could try to parse that if we wanted to talk about there's a difference in a vacant building and an abandoned building. In my view, that's such a thin line that I would not want to try to put a definition of a vacant building to be one thing and an abandoned building to be something else, because I think they're both problems. Whether it's a vacant building that's abandoned or an abandoned building that's vacant, it's still a problem. It's an issue.
And our city requirement would be that it is secure. That is our requirement on an abandoned or vacant, whatever you want to call it, is that it is secure, versus or secure. And that is something that our property needs to be.
And I guess, I mean, and I'm looking out here and I see different players in different industries. It really get in, I guess getting down to the meat of a lot of this. And I think I discussed it last time. I used this cross-street neighbor of mine who moved out 2 years ago, and hopefully he's going to close on selling his house in town, next week. But it has been, in my view, vacant for 2 years, but not abandoned. I mean, he keeps the grass up. It's been secure. But he's paying whatever the mortgage is on that one there, as well as where he's living now. And getting down to some of this, and I think I mentioned last time, and I say penalize, but we're going to charge people more money because they're not lucky enough to sell their house, so to speak, in a timely manner. So, now they've got 2 mortgages or 2 payments plus some kind of fee because they haven't been able to sell their house. I guess that issue there, and that's why I kind of look at, in my mind, vacant versus abandoned a little bit on different levels along that.
And I would agree with you totally that would be completely unfair and not something that we would be seeking to do. As we, I think, tried to bring out in our first meeting, that the issues that we're trying to address with this committee are not meant in any way to be punitive toward any group of people or to any entity. I do not believe that it would be fair to assess a charge on a property that is clearly legally eligible to be leased or rented or sold. And I think that exceptions, and I think that we did, and I tried to address some of that. We haven't had a chance to look at this, and this is going back. Our focus, I was trying to get a couple of reports from on rental registration and the progress that's being made in the neighborhood organization effort before we got to the vacant and abandoned buildings. But that is one of the issues that I do realize that's a legitimate issue. And I would certainly put language in the law that says that vacant buildings shall not include properties that are under contract or properties that are within a reasonable expectation to be leased, rented, or sold, properties which are under construction, properties which are under renovation. So there would certainly be exceptions built into any ordinance that we did. And we certainly would not be looking to assess a fee on someone's property that is in the process of being sold, or the efforts of being there's clear evidence that the property is in the process of being sold, or there is an effort to convey it. I think that we could address those kinds of issues.
Can I say this, Art?
Yeah.
When you start talking about, from my standpoint, as someone who might be asked to implement such a thing, when you start adding exceptions, you start adding layers of things that make it very hard for us to make decisions on. You know, it's very clear, you know, if you have a very clear definition of something, but yet does not include these 10 things, you know, something could get caught up in a situation where they should have been accepted and we didn't accept it, or we didn't address it because we assumed that there was an exception. So we would be, you know, the bad guy either way. And so we get stuck in a kind of a lose-lose situation. So I just throw that out there as you know, try to determine what your exceptions might be and what you don't intend to drag into the net. You might exclude everything, or you.
Well, you know, I believe that, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Conway, but I believe that there are exceptions to every rule. There are, I think that all of the ordinances that we've looked at, I mean, I'm telling you that we have looked at, I don't know how many ordinances from around the country where there are rental registration rules, where there are vacant and abandoned building ordinances, and they all have some exceptions in them somewhere.
Sure.
We talked about the charitable organizations. We talked about the government-owned housing, such as the new Centennial Hill Plaza and the new Trenum Court, the Columbus Square projects. Those projects would be accepted under most of the ordinances that we looked at. And properties that are under rehabilitation, you know, active construction, and those kinds of things, we found exceptions in most of the ordinances that we looked at for those properties. And it would be, you know, in the final analysis, purely at the discretion of a competent agency that's managing and overseeing this, at the discretion of the chief building official or whomever it happens to be, the designee, the public works director, who would make those decisions with the staff as to what can reasonably be accepted and what cannot.
Right.
But
Well,
I think
obviously we'll live and try to work with whatever comes up. But I guess when you say things like, you know, when I hear the specific exception of, you know, government owned or under contract or has a permit pulled for construction or rehabilitation, those are things that we can kind of easily deal with. It's just when you get into the broader language of reasonably expected to be, you know, those are things I would just hope that we stay away from, but we'll try to make a determination.
And you know, that's a matter of, I guess, semantics, language, you know, legal jargon, however that turns out. But if there's a reasonably expected to be leased or rented, a decent house that's in good condition, that is being well kept, that it has a for rent or for sale sign in the yard, in my view, that would be the evidence of a reasonable expectation that this house is going to be done something with that's meaningful and worthwhile. And I think it would be fairly easy to determine if there's a property that's not eligible to be a part of that kind of situation. I just believe that we can't write a rule, a hard and fast rule that's going to affect every single situation. But I do believe that if we created a component with an intelligent approach and fair and judicial approach to doing this, we could work with that. I would just like to share, when we talk about exceptions to every rule, I was just having a conversation with the chief of staff earlier about Lincoln Cemetery. And as most of us know, a few years ago, the council passed what was called a cease and desist order for interring bodies in cemeteries like Lincoln, and you've supervised this whole thing. So you're aware of what we're talking about. And there were people, there's a 103-year-old woman who dies, who bought a plot in Lincoln Cemetery 80 years ago. And her family has said that her desire was to be buried in Lincoln Cemetery. Well, some of the members of the cemetery authority want to say that there are no exceptions, that we passed a cease and desist order, And that means that nobody can ever be buried in Lincoln Cemetery ever again, as long as we live. Well, how do you say to a 103-year-old woman's family who bought the plot 80 years ago that there is not an exception to that rule, that we might not be able to make a decision that this is a situation that's worthy of being accepted? And that's why I believe that there should be an exception. And I was telling him earlier, in the cease and desist order that we voted for, we should have put in some exceptions that would have allowed for the burial of this woman without any major controversy. So that's my exception. Exactly.
Yeah. No, like I say, I'm fully aware of that. I personally think the right thing was done. The cease and desist order affected some change out there, and we have had an exception that I think most reasonable people would agree should have been allowed under the circumstances that were presented. So it's still on its own, right? So again, if we would have just said cease and desist with, unless you thought you were going to be buried out there, then there would have been no exception. There would have been no cease and desist, and we would have continued on. Since we did pass a hard and fast, we were able to then take a look at a case by case basis of, if there's a really significant situation that we need to consider, we might be worthy of consideration in these reports.
Well, time is moving on, and thank you very much. And we do look to get periodic updates as we go forward, as this committee will remain in force to try to gauge progress as we work toward the comprehensive neighborhood revitalization effort that we're putting forth. And I think the consultant that issued a report several months ago, and we made the point also, I think, in some of our council meetings, that there is not a need to create something new. We believe that every resource that we need to address the issues and the challenges that we're talking about already exist in city government. It's simply a matter of, as Mr. Carr said earlier, communicating across department lines, bringing all of those various and disparate entities together to work together toward the common goal of addressing the issues in neighborhoods and the life in the city. And I think that we're on the road to doing that. Just like to see it accelerated. That's my personal. And I'd like to ask Mr. Crabb with the business department to give us just a brief idea of what might be done. Originally, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Committee, member, we proposed a rental registration and inspection ordinance, a separate piece of legislation that was to deal with this issue of rental properties in the city. And then, in reading the consultant's report, we were reminded that the business code, which we already operate under in the city of Montgomery, has already provisions in it for rental registration and inspection. So what would then be the need to bring in another layer of bureaucracy, creating another ordinance to accomplish what we can already accomplish if we simply enforce the provisions of the business license as it exists today? And I think the business license component has been looking at what the possibilities are in doing that.
Yes, and as we've talked, we are looking for a way to enforce the business license as it pertains to residential landlords. Our business license code does have a provision in to require residential landlords to maintain a business license. The difficulty with that, and why we never have enforced that, is we never like to have an ordinance on the books that we don't have the ability to enforce. If somebody is operating a business and they don't obtain a business license, it's very easy for us to ask the chief of police or the police department to go out and close this business because they don't have the proper license. when you get to residential real estate, we can't do that. I mean, a house is owned by somebody out of state and a tenant is living in it. We can't close that business because they're out of code. So those are some of the difficulties, and we've been working on ways to get that process started. We've looked at other cities, one in particular that we like. Huntsville has a license where they require registrations, but they don't require inspections from the codes department or the fire department. That's something we're looking at now. The city's legal department is looking into how you get the exclusion. The way our ordinances are written, in order to get a business license, you have to get approval from inspections and the fire department. Huntsville has the same provision. All cities do. There must be a way around that, but with 4,000, 10,000 residential rental properties, and let me be clear, quadplexes, if it's a cluster of 4 residential units or greater is considered an apartment complex, and we will require a license for that. So what we're talking about are primarily single-family homes, duplexes and triplexes. What we're looking at is something that would essentially be a registration. I see some reporters taking notes, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that the city's going to try to balance their budget with residential landlords. It is an effort for us to get the registration of the rental properties that are out there. It would be, in Huntsville, the fee is $35. It's a minimal amount.
35 for whether I have 1 or 50?
We're getting a clarification on that, but I think it is per unit, 35 per unit. If you've got 50 houses, it'd be 35. We would probably reduce it to something less than that. It's not a revenue raising measure as much as we're trying to address the problem of landlords that aren't taking care of their properties. And once we can get them on the books and we have the ability to follow up with inspections, and we always have that ability. I mean, if there's a property out there that's, again, talking about the business licenses, if there's a commercial property out there that has obvious compliance issues, inspections has the authority to go in and cut utilities off and shut a business down. Clearly, that's not something we can do with residential real estate. There are things that can be done, and there are ways to address it. So while I don't think that the revenue division is going to be able to solve the problem, we certainly want to do our share. We pledge our support, and if getting the registration in place, we're continuing to gather information. We want to get answers to questions like that. Is this a per unit basis? Is it, say $100,000 of revenue, flat amount, so you've got 1 unit or you've got 50? We're trying to get clarification on some of those issues, also some of the legal issues with respect to enforcement, and we'll bring that back to you.
Can you give us some idea on what you might be looking at as a timeline for maybe having some definitive statements to make? It's difficult to say.
I hate to put a time frame on it, but I mean, I would think in the next month or two we can get information. We can get the information and come up with the biggest pushback from the legal department is, what are we going to do once we find out that you've got somebody out of compliance? What really can the city do with that? I mean, you can go through a court process. But what I like about the revenue division, with business licenses, when we bring somebody before city council, things get fixed. And that's not going to really be a threat we can have with residential real estate. If getting the registration starts the process, again, we want to pledge our support. It will be a minimal fee in terms of what the registration fee is, but it will get you officially registered your property on the city database if you follow it. And Pam, the revenue manager who's been spearheading a lot of this, Pam Porter.
And if I may address what Councilman Lee has asked, currently our business license ordinance states that business licenses are for an individual location. So in the event that we don't get that part of it settled, it will be per individual location would have to have a license as it currently stands.
And I don't want to get down into too many details, but that's just another issue. We've got 7 compliance officers, and that's what they do. They go knock on your door and say, show me your business license where you're authorized to do business in the city of Montgomery. We can't knock on somebody's door and ask to see the business license. I mean, this is the tenant. Show us where the owner of your house has the license to do business. So there's some practical things that will be different for revenue division. We will work to get them registered to get the process started, but the enforcement, I think, is going to be something different than what we've been used to, or maybe with a different requirement.
I would agree that it's probably something that's different from what the Revenue Department is accustomed to, as there has never been any enforcement or any effort to enforce this aspect of this business license ordinance. But I would encourage all of us to look at the business license ordinance. It's a very strong ordinance. It's very comprehensive. It is far-reaching. It gives a lot of authority to the Finance Division to enforce the business license code. And if the rental properties were included under that umbrella, there would be the same latitude available to enforce with the rental licenses as with other businesses. I do realize that it's a business of a different nature. I do realize that we're not going to send inspectors out to inspect every single residential property that's being rented in the city of Montgomery. And that certainly is not the intent of this, because we've not been in this business before, and it is something that we need to move into incrementally. I do realize that. But there are cities that do require inspections of rental properties on a regular basis, and they require the owner of the property to pay for it in some instances. So it's not as if it cannot be done. It can be done. But the idea in my mind would not be to create something onerous, something that would be a burden to the persons who are in the business of renting real estate, and to suggest to them that they're being threatened with some regular city inspections that would just be another bureaucratic burden on the realtor or the person who's doing the rental of the property. But I think that the fact that the business code ordinance does allow for inspections, it at least creates the aura, or it at least lets the property owner know, or the landlord know, that there's a possibility for an inspection. And while we probably have some responsible realtors in the room today, and landlords, but there are many who are not. And there are many people in this city who are renting properties that should not be being rented. And that's the bottom line point that I want to make, that we have some shanties and some shacks that are not habitable by human beings, that are being rented by people. And I think they need to be put on notice that they would not be able to continue to operate without any fear of retribution from any aspect of city government.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, the people that are here, I'm going to assume, and I know a few and I don't know a bunch, but if they're here, they care, they're involved. I would venture to say that we would be willing to go in any of their properties and be happily lay our head down at night, but it's the ones that got one in my, or me in my district, probably as well you do, that, you know, you wouldn't let your worst enemy or your dog sleep in. And how we get them, whether it's the threat of inspections and following through with the inspection and, you know, shutting it down, whatever it is, but that the difference, you know, not throwing everybody under the same umbrella and you know, saying they're all bad, or penalizing everybody that's doing it for the most part the right way, that's civil and clean and etc. But you know, how we get from good and fine to, you know,
that's it. And there are different sets of rules involved, and I wish Mickey, who could be here to speak to them, but you know, the tire dealer across the street or down the street, they don't operate. It's easy to go shut that down. You don't have a business license, clearly right here, you got to go. When you get landlords and tenants involved, it's just another set of rules. And you know, our rules won't supersede them, and I can't speak intelligently about them, but according to the legal group, it's just different. That's not to say we're not gonna do this and get started. I mean, there will be some good from it, and the idea will be to fashion it in a way that will not penalize the people that are doing things right. Again, this is not a big revenue raising measure we're trying to get done for the city. It's trying to clean it up. So it's not to penalize the people that are doing it right, but to get a record and put us in a position to start to clean up some of the people that are not.
Which, you know, obviously the people that are in the business, whether it's state realtors or the local Mars, I think those would be, you know, good voices and people to work with, whether we have a working session coming up once we get a little bit more detail in this to see what would work for everybody, but yet get what we're trying to get accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Corby. We are now at a point where our real focus today was to be on and just to reinforce what Mr. Krabs said before he sat down, responsible landlords, responsible realtors need not be concerned about any of what we're doing. Because just as Mr. Lee pointed out, if you're doing the right thing, there's no reason to be concerned about it anyway. If your properties are up to code, if you're a responsible landlord, a property owner, none of this will affect you in any way, except that we are looking at the possibility of trying to get those people who are not doing what they're supposed to do to be more responsible and to clean up our city. That's the point we're trying to make. With this vacant building ordinance, and I know the time is spent, and we're not going to stay here much longer, and obviously we're not going to come to any real consensus here today. But the proposed vacant building ordinance that we proposed, and I have pulled out a few bullet points just to give our committee and our city officials and the stakeholders here an opportunity to understand exactly what we're trying to do. We have a profile here of a number of cities that have these vacant abandoned building ordinances, and I just pulled a few because, as I said, there are dozens of them, and you'll find that most of them have pretty much the same common components. They all require the owner to apply for a registration certificate within so many days of the building becoming vacant. Most of them require an initial certificate period which expires at a certain time and has to be renewed. Obviously, the object is to make certain that people stay aware and vigilant about the need to do something about a vacant property or a property that could be considered abandoned. The ordinance which we modeled, most of what we did after was North Chicago, I believe. It has an initial certificate period of 6 months, and after that 6-month period, it has to be renewed for another 6 months, and after that 6-month period, it has to be renewed for another 6 months, and for a maximum of 18 months. In the ordinance which we pulled together with our legal department, we bumped that up to 24 months. So rather than the 3 renewals, we would have 4 renewals in the ordinance that we're proposing. It would, and at the end of that 24-month period, if the building still remained vacant, then the owner of that building would be subject to something like the administrative fee that we now assess against people who don't cut their grass. I think it's $150, something like that, Mr. Carr. So the owner of that building, for as long as it continuously remained vacant, would be subject to an administrative fee on an annual basis if the building is not repurposed or reoccupied or demolished or something done with the building. We're proposing that the fees for the commercial and residential buildings be determined by a fee schedule that we could look at with the Montgomery City Council and determine what that fee schedule could be. The owner of the building would be required, according to our ordinance and most of the other ordinances, to complete a statement of intent That is, what do you plan to do with the building? State your future plans for what the future of this building is. The building must be made accessible for city inspectors. If the city decided they wanted to inspect the building, but once again, we're not talking about imposing some kind of mandatory inspection schedule. We're saying that the building, if city inspectors decided that the building, there was reasonable evidence to believe that the building ought to be inspected because it's in non-compliance, then the building would have to be available for inspection by city inspectors. Our ordinance would say that the owner has 30 days to bring the building into compliance with maintenance codes if it's found not to be in full compliance. Now, the 30 days is something of a misnomer, because the 30 days would only come into effect after 90 days, because we're really talking about 120 days. We're saying that the building would not be declared vacant or abandoned unless it has been vacant or abandoned for at least 90 days. And then after the 90-day period, then the owner of the building has a 30-day period with which to correct any problems with the building according to city maintenance code. And that's basically what the vacant building ordinance would do. This is not all of the detail of it, of course, but those are the broad parameters of it, and we will continue to work on it. And of course, we will be seeking the input of the other members of council, the mayor's staff, and stakeholders in the community as well, as we move forward and trying to fashion something that would be meaningful and effective for the city of Montgomery and tailored to the needs of the city of Montgomery. Any additional comments? Questions?
Again, I guess the question is, in your mind, the next step is get some information from Barry and then follow through with more of a work session. I mean, as far as where we go from today, I guess would be my question.
Yes, sir. We would be looking to continue our discussions with Public Works and the City Services, with business license codes, and with every other aspect of city government that would be concerned with the vacant buildings. So the vacant buildings are separate from the rental registration. The vacant buildings would stand on its own, because we have, as we know, dozens of vacant buildings, commercial buildings all over the city that live in the city. And we need to do something about that. We have a lot of absentee, irresponsible property owners who don't care about our city. They're disrespecting our city when they allow that kind of life to develop in our city, and we should not tolerate it. And that's why it is my intent to push as strongly as I can, as long as I'm a member of the city council, to make sure that we have some kind of regulation of these people who own these buildings. And with that,
Councilman,
yes.
would it be appropriate to ask anybody in the audience has any feedback?
It's always appropriate, yes. Yes, sir.
Any comments?
Any comments?
On rental registration, particularly from landlords out there?
Yes, sir.
I might just say that an exemption could be if the property is actively being managed and marketed by a licensed real estate agent.
That's great language. Actively
Managed and marketed by a licensed real estate agent.
If I'm not mistaken, the Real Estate Commission has Alabama rules and regulations in which you have to abide by in order to maintain your status as a real estate agent or broker.
There are 15 hours of continuing education every 2 years for your life.
Yes, sir, and you have to maintain an escrow account for maintenance of your properties. You have to detail your monies in and out of those accounts. So you therefore are very much a responsible landowner or manager at that point in time.
The problem with that is one of our biggest houses in Capitol Heights is managed by a property manager who owns a real estate company. And we've been complaining with the city for months about an illegal automobile business going on there.
Maybe perhaps you might want to move that complaint to the Alabama Real Estate Commission and let them investigate that.
Well,
And you-
that might be quicker.
And you might get a little bit more response because they have the power to remove that gentleman's real estate license and brokership.
Thank you.
You commented about the alleyways in Highland Park Garden District. You say the city had abandoned all those, or
Well,
some of them?
My view is that the city has abandoned them because the city does nothing to actively police them, to maintain them in any way. I just think the city walked away from them many, many years ago and expected that the property owners whose properties were contiguous to or adjacent to those alleyways would take care of them. I've asked for a map from the planning department and there's a whole network of those alleyways in neighborhoods like Highland Park, where there are no driveways and people are expected to access their homes from the back door. And the alleyways exist, but they are not being maintained by anyone. So there are fertile areas for people to dump construction debris, litter, the weeds and the grass never get cut, except for the residents who might take the responsibility to do it. And I think that's an issue there. Once again, it's a matter of resources, I'm sure. We are operating on a revenue stream that has been in place for the last 40 years. And as times have changed, we have not addressed issues that would require additional resources to maintain city services at a level that people expect them to be maintained. That's a broader government policy issue. And it's also a very political issue because nobody wants to talk to the citizens of Montgomery about additional revenues to do the job that you need to do to meet the challenges that exist today.
And I don't know specifically what he's talking about, but just to kind of talk, it's not as if it's a paved alleyway that we just said we're walking away from it. I mean, there exist alleyways all over town. They're paved, some are private, some are public, those sorts of things go on. But if you look on an old map of Montgomery and some of these other there are networks of alleys that were planned but never done. There are streets that were planned and never built. And those sorts of things exist all over town. So they've never been dedicated to the city for maintenance. Normally what happens is when a developer builds a neighborhood, they plat the whole subdivision and they incrementally build that out. And as those different things are built and they're inspected by the city, they come to a certain standard, and at the end of the day, they are dedicated by plat for the city for perpetual maintenance. So again, it's always a case-by-case basis, and we have to do a little bit of research about what's going on. I think we've closed some of those on either end to kind of turn that back over to certain responsible neighbors and those sorts of things. So there are strategies that we have effected that have been successful in a lot of those cases. And there are cases where we've been able to get out there and pick up an illegal dump or something like that. One of the other issues is you're responsible for your property out to the street, and there exist on most people's property portions of city right-of-way on your property. You're responsible for it out to the street, to include the grass in between the sidewalk and the street, and those sorts of things that are technically city right-of-way, but it's the property owner's responsibility to take care of in terms of edging and all those sorts of things. So you kind of get into those issues. Another example is somebody takes their debris and they put it in front or on their neighbor's property, right? So the neighbor calls me to say, I need you to do something about this neighbor who just put something on my property. Well, unfortunately, it's your problem now. I didn't see him do it, you saw him do it, you have some action from a neighbor to neighbor standpoint, but if I'm going to affect something from a property maintenance standpoint, I have to take care of it for the adjacent property owner, not the one who you tell me put it on you and made a problem. So, all these are just kind of little nuanced issues that come up kind of all the time. But anyway, it just sounded like when Trey said we've abandoned a bunch of alleys and aren't taking care of them or whatever. But I just want to make a distinction that these aren't paved alleys and active streets or anything like that. I think they're just, if they exist, as things that were never actually put in place. Or if they were, they've long been out of place. I don't know.
Who does own a lot of those? I mean, if this developer has an alleyway that was never paved, is it?
Well, what I'm saying is, so there's a house that's been built, maybe up and down the entire alley, but they just never developed, they didn't build or.
So the developer so it's a developer-owned property.
Well, again, we're talking 1900s, so I don't know if the term developer even existed back then, you know what I mean?
So it's not like something for a fire truck ingress, egress, it was just.
Well, it's probably for, like I say, it's rear access to the home. I think that's where they come in and out of their house. Because they're right on the street, so to speak, and they have a back alleyway system.
And maybe one time the garbage truck went down there and picked up the garbage.
Any additional comments from anyone?
We certainly appreciate your efforts, especially those of us in those neighborhoods. Thank you.
Well, what we had hoped to accomplish today was to get an update on what is happening with the rental registration and the neighborhood revitalization effort overall. I had also hoped that we would be able to come to some consensus on moving forward with the vacant and abandoned properties ordinance as well. One of our committee members obviously is not here, and I think Mr. Lee would agree with me that we don't want to try to move forward with anything without including the entire committee and being able to come to some consensus on what to propose to the city council. But we do hope to have something ready to propose to the city council within the next few weeks, for sure. And with that, if we don't have any additional comments from anyone in the audience, I will declare that.
Move to adjourn.
To adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for coming.